Hello, everyone. It's just me here. I'm going to be talking about adaptations and the importance of using your media to the fullest potential possible. Adaptations have become a lot more popular lately. Yay! Isn't that great? No, but in seriousness, it's not just adaptations of video games. Oh no, it's a clusterfuck of live action anime adaptations which have been bad and bad, but sometimes good and good, but also really bad. Basically, basically, uh, it's a coin flip to see if an adaptation is going to be bad, which most likely is the case. But there's also these rare exceptions where it's sometimes good. I'm going to be talking about the mediums in which these adaptations are adapted from. Let's start with video games. Video games adaptations. So almost everyone agrees that video games adaptations are about as good as a detective thriller without the detective. Let me explain. The purpose of the video game is to put you, the protagonist, little Timmy bitch boy, into the shoes of the protagonist and experience the plot and story through your actions as the player. That's why games have always been the amazing media it is. You are playing the fighter. You are the detective in a detective game. You are the soldier in a Call of Duty game. And you are the cowboy in the Old West. That's why the medium has always been a sort of wish fulfillment fantasy for people to imagine themselves as someone else. And that's the main problem with adapting video games. Let's look at the let's look at the big one. Let's look at what I mean when I say mediums adapted into a different interactive video games adapted into a visual media. Let's look at the biggest one, which kind of shows exactly what I'm talking about. The Uncharted game, the Uncharted movie. Uncharted is an action-adventure video game franchise that places you in the role of treasure hunter, Nathan Drake. I'm sure a lot of young men who grew up watching Indiana Jones thought to themselves, hey, I wish I was the treasure hunter looking for gold and riches and fortune and all that stupid shit. Uncharted was sort of a way to fulfill that fantasy that you could be a treasure hunter yourself and fight against bad guys and shoot people and all that shit. So it's no surprise that the live action adaptation failed as hard as it did. You are asking people to watch a film based off the game where you play as the adventurer is basically just Indiana Jones. It's basically Indiana Jones. That's like me watching Rocky and thinking, yeah, I want to be a boxer. And they make a game where you play as a boxer and they adapt that game into a live action adaptation. That's just fucking Rocky with extra steps. That's the point. You missed the entire point of why I like the games. Let's look at a game like The Walking Dead, based off of TV shows and the comics and whatever. It's a choice-based gameplay where the decisions and actions are yours alone. The decisions that make you who you are as a person. The choices you make that affects the story going forward. And that's the main appeal of these type of choice-based games, these multiple choice games where you explore different sides to a character, where you explore yourself as a person. It's similar to the games like Detroit Become Human and all those games where you take that premise and you push it to an extent where if a character dies in that game, the story will still progress without that character, showing that there are still real stakes in the game. That if one of the characters you are playing as dies, the story will progress without that character. Let's look at Ghost of Tsushima. There have always been plenty of games where you play as a samurai, but I believe that Ghost of Tsushima sort of reached that full potential of playing as a samurai, which being realistic, but also being very realistic as a samurai. The forms you take, the swords you slash, the enemies you kill, the way you progress through the story, the fights, the action, all that. The Ghost of Tsushima did push that to the extent. It's like you're playing as a samurai from those old samurai films in Vizzy. It's basically imagine yourself as a ninja or a samurai or whatever. And Ghost of Tsushima did a cool job with not just telling a great gameplay, with a great gameplay premise, but also a great story and characters and all that stupid shit. The problem with movies and TV is that it's a visual medium, while gaming is an interactive media, so the transition from those two things doesn't always work. It depends on the medium itself, but most of the time it doesn't really work. However, lately we've been getting a good set of pretty good films based on iconic characters like Sonic, Mario, and Pikachu. I mean, unless they look like this, then you can just fuck off. These characters have these characters are beloved into pop culture that people will see these films just for these characters. I mean, the Mario film passed the 1 billion mark at the box office despite it being a relatively simple and fun film. These characters are recognizable in pop culture that they are enough to bring in an audience. Although the games are staples in gaming history themselves, the characters that the characters themselves are massively successful and loved by millions and millions of people. And they were able to gain an audience without having a very complex, very really unique movie. Now, let's talk about what happens when a popular fictional character gets his own like gets his own video game. We call that Batman and Spider-Man PS4. Batman and Spider-Man PS4. Now, I wasn't able to get a picture for some fucking reason. I don't know what the hell's going on there. But yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The Batman and Spider-Man PS4 games. They do a great job at what happens when these games, particularly the Batman Arkham games, change the landscape of gaming entirely. You can finally play as heroes you looked up to your entire lives and become these larger than life figures, and sort of like these games really make you feel like Spider-Man. These games make you feel like Batman. Shut the fuck up. I know you've heard this like 1,000 times, but it's true. You really feel like Batman. You really feel like Spider-Man, and that's the reason these games were successful as they were. You lived your life as a fantasy of being Batman. That's why they were so beloved. Now, let's look at The Last of Us. The Last of Us live action video game adaptation that succeeded in properly adapting a video game. So the question is, why did this work when all others failed? I mean, you look at Uncharted, it's basically created by the same studio, but it failed where Last of Us succeeded. Eddie Burback made a whole video, and his brother made a whole video on this. So go check out that video. You'll probably already know this. I'm just gonna explain it. The main focus of the game isn't on the gameplay itself, but the characters and journey that our two protagonists go on, Joel and Ellie. The gameplay is not the important part of the game; it's the story and the game shine. So it would be much easier to adapt that into a television, and not only that, explore a lot more things through a visual medium that wasn't really explored like in the original game. For example, we get a lot more interaction with Joel and his daughter than we do in the first games. We get a lot more flashbacks into the beginning of the apocalypse and that we didn't really get to see in the first game. Now it's interesting. The Bill and Frank episode, the third episode of Last of Us TV series, is probably my favorite one in the entire series, yet it has nothing to do with the game itself. So in fact, it succeeds and explores a deeper realm to Bill and Frank's character, which I thought was pretty good. Yeah. Also when they try to do like a copy and paste, there were flaws within the game itself, within the TV show itself. For example, there were very little like infected past like episode 5 for some reason. I don't know why, but I wish the series would have been a lot more longer than it is. So like 13 episodes, you can say. I thought the last episode was a bit rush, sort of say, but that's just my personal opinion on it. But yeah, it was. I mean, the last episode did explore Ellie's mom, did explore show Ellie's mom and how that happened. But yeah, I feel like the last episode was really short. That I really didn't feel like they explored like yeah, it did a good job. It did a solid execution, but I feel like it could have done more. I do feel like it was probably rushed, but overall, a pretty good series. It taps into both market. It taps into like the fans of the games and newcomers into the series, and it did a good job of that. Another time that it worked when adaptations worked was with the Castlevania games. The Castlevania games was this sidestep sort of games that were very popular in the 90s. So it would be interesting to see it adapt, and Netflix did it fucking amazing. It adapted the series into an animated, sort of anime-like project that sort of explored these wide cast of characters like Isaac and Alucard and Trevor and all that, and Dracula and all of that. The animation and it had a whole cast of widely diverse cast of characters with their own beliefs, goals, and motivation. And the animation fucking stood out amazingly in this series. It was the highlights of the entire show was the animation. And I think and that's a case of a medium using its strengths to its fullest potential. And with the animated series, it used its animation and its fights to sort of tell its story, and it did a good job at it. Now, another franchise I think could work like this is the Mortal Kombat series. I'm not a huge fan of the combat in the Mortal Kombat games. In fact, I think it's kind of stiff compared to like Street Fighter and all that. But the lore and characters have so much depth to be explored through an animated series. I know they have an adaptations. I know they have adaptations, and honestly, I'm kind of mixed with them. The first live action movie was a genuinely fun movie that felt like a Mortal Kombat film, but the second one sucked ass. Also, the animated films are pretty good, but leave much to be desired. There was a reboot of the Mortal Kombat franchise in another live action movie, but it was just pretty boring. Like it didn't really like it had some good casting, but it was a pretty boring film overall. Well, conclusion. There are different ways to tell us stories and have an amazing experience through different mediums, and to try to adapt these mediums into something different entirely is such a huge business risk that I don't know if it's worth the risk or not. We've had successful adaptations, sure, but we've had dozens and dozens of failures. So yeah, we make a good couple of adaptations, so we get cocky and we start thinking we can do all of it. I mean, look at the Halo series. What's the point I'm getting at here? Well, my point is,